Motivation is unreliable. It shows up when it wants to. It disappears when you need it most. If you depend on feeling inspired, you will live inconsistently. You will start strong and finish weak. You will promise and then retreat. This audiobook is not about hype. It is about structure. It is about building a system inside yourself that operates whether you feel like it or not. Because when energy fades, when emotion drops, when drive disappears, discipline is what remains. And if you build discipline correctly, you become unstoppable. Chapter 1. Stop waiting to feel ready. Motivation is an emotion. Discipline is a decision. Understand the difference immediately. Emotion rises. Emotion falls. Emotion disappears without warning. If your action depends on emotion, your results will always be unstable. You say you're waiting to feel ready. You say you need the right mindset. You say you'll start when you're more confident. That is delay disguised as preparation. Readiness is a myth people use to postpone discomfort. That's the truth. You have a choice. You can wait for the feeling, or you can become the kind of person who moves without it. I move before I feel ready. That is the standard. High performers do not consult their mood. They consult their schedule. The alarm rings. They get up. The calendar says train. They train. The task is uncomfortable. They begin anyway. It's not about hype. It's about obedience to structure. You don't need their permission. You don't need the perfect conditions. You don't need the emotional surge. You need to move. Action creates momentum, not the other way around. Most people believe momentum creates action. They are wrong. They sit still waiting for inspiration to strike. They scroll. They hesitate. They overthink. And in that hesitation, they lose power. Because every time you hesitate, you reinforce hesitation. Every time you delay, you strengthen delay. Waiting builds weakness. Starting builds power. That's the key. The first 5 minutes matter more than your feelings. The first rep matters more than your doubts. The first sentence matters more than your insecurity. You don't need to feel confident to act. You need to act to build confidence. Reverse the order. You say, I don't feel motivated to go to the gym. Good. Go anyway. You say, I'm not in the mood to work. Good. Work anyway. You say, I don't feel ready to have that difficult conversation. Good. Speak anyway. You have a choice. Either your feelings command you, or your standards command you. There is no third option. When you move before you feel ready, something powerful happens. Your identity shifts. You stop seeing yourself as someone who tries. You begin seeing yourself as someone who executes. That identity is everything. Because once identity changes, behavior follows automatically. This is not about intensity. It is about consistency. Intensity is emotional. Consistency is structural. And discipline is built through repetition under resistance. Let me be clear. The resistance never disappears. The doubt never fully leaves. The discomfort does not fade permanently. You simply become someone who acts anyway. I move before I feel ready. Repeat it, because this phrase interrupts hesitation. It overrides negotiation. It replaces emotion with command. You don't rise to the level of your motivation. You fall to the level of your systems. If there is no system, there is only mood. And mood is unstable. Look at your life honestly. Where are you waiting? Where are you postponing? Where are you telling yourself, soon? That word is dangerous. Soon becomes next month. Next month becomes next year. Next year becomes regret. You don't need more time. You need more immediate action. That's the difference. When you train yourself to start before you feel ready, you build psychological strength. You prove to yourself that discomfort is not fatal, that hesitation is optional, that fear is survivable, and that proof compounds. Each time you act without readiness, you collect evidence. Evidence that you are capable. Evidence that you are reliable. Evidence that you follow through. Self-trust is built this way, not through affirmations, through action. You say you want discipline, then stop waiting. You have a choice. You can build the habit of delay, or you can build the habit of immediate execution. Immediate execution wins long term. Here is the behavioral instruction. Simple. Direct. When a task appears, count down from 5 and begin. No debate. No analysis. No internal discussion. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Move. Do not evaluate your energy level. That's irrelevant. It's not about emotion. It's about obedience to decision. Schedule your actions the night before. Remove ambiguity. When the time arrives, execute. If you wait to feel like it, you have already lost. You must train your nervous system to tolerate imperfect beginnings. The first draft will be messy. Start anyway. The first workout will feel heavy. Begin anyway. The first attempt will feel awkward. Do it anyway. Because perfection is another form of procrastination. You don't need perfect conditions. You need forward motion. And here is something most people ignore. Starting poorly is still starting. Momentum does not require excellence. It requires movement. You move. Momentum builds. Momentum builds. Confidence grows. Confidence grows. Identity shifts. That's the progression. But it begins with action before readiness. I move before I feel ready. Say it again. Every time you override hesitation, you shrink it. Every time you delay, you feed it. That's the law. This is why discipline remains when motivation disappears. Because discipline is not dependent on internal weather. It is dependent on internal command. You decide. You act. End of discussion. If you master this chapter alone, your life changes. No more waiting for the right time. No more emotional negotiation. No more dramatic build-up before simple tasks. Just execution. This is how professionals operate. Quietly, predictably, reliably, and reliability is power. When others hesitate, you move. When others complain, you execute. When others wait, you build. You don't need applause. You don't need encouragement. You need standards. And standards require action without readiness. You have a choice. Live emotionally, or live structurally. Live reactively, or live decisively. Stop waiting to feel ready. Move before you feel ready. Because the person you want to become is built in those exact moments. The moments when you do not want to begin and you begin anyway. You have stopped waiting. Good. Now we eliminate something even more dangerous than hesitation. Chapter 2. Remove emotion from execution. Emotion fluctuates. Standards do not. That sentence alone can change your life. Your emotions are weather. They shift hourly. Sometimes you wake up energized. Sometimes you wake up heavy. sometimes confident, sometimes doubtful. But your standards, those are architecture. They are fixed. They do not bend because you feel uncomfortable. The problem is not that you have emotions. The problem is that you allow them to vote on your decisions. You wake up tired and think, maybe I'll skip today. You feel discouraged and think, maybe I'll slow down. You feel unmotivated and think, maybe tomorrow. That is emotional democracy, and it destroys discipline. You do not negotiate with your calendar. If it says train at 6 a.m., you train. If it says write for 1 hour, you write. If it says make the call, you make the call. No debate. No internal meeting. No emotional discussion. Feelings are irrelevant to the task. Repeat it, because this is the separation most people never master. They think discipline means suppressing emotion. It doesn't. It means ignoring emotion when it conflicts with standards. You can feel tired and still execute. You can feel discouraged and still perform. You can feel bored and still complete the task. You have a choice. You can make performance dependent on mood, or you can make performance dependent on decision. Professionals choose decision. Look at elite performers in any field. Athletes, surgeons, pilots, entrepreneurs. They do not cancel performance because of mood swings. Imagine a pilot saying, I don't feel inspired to land today. Imagine a surgeon saying, I'm just not motivated for this operation. Unacceptable. So why do you allow that standard in your own life? It's not about passion. It's about precision. Professionals execute on bad days. They don't lower output because energy is low. They adjust pace if necessary, but the standard remains intact. Low energy is not an excuse. It is a condition to manage. That's the key. You must detach performance from emotion. This is how you do it. First, define non-negotiables. These are actions that happen regardless of mood. Training, work block, study time, reflection, whatever builds your future. Second, track adherence, not emotion. At the end of the day, you do not ask, how did I feel? You ask, did I execute? Third, eliminate emotional language from your self-talk. Instead of, I don't feel like it, say, it's scheduled. Instead of, I'm not in the mood, say, the task requires completion. Language shapes identity. Feelings are irrelevant to the task. Say it when resistance appears, because resistance will appear. You will wake up exhausted. You will experience setbacks. You will doubt yourself. And in those moments, your discipline is tested. Most people believe productivity requires excitement. That's false. Productivity requires neutrality. Precision requires emotional neutrality. When you remove drama from effort, productivity increases automatically. Drama is energy wasted. Complaining is energy wasted. Overthinking is energy wasted. Analyzing your mood is energy wasted. All of it distracts from execution. You don't need to feel powerful. You need to follow the system. That's the difference. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Your emotions are often lying to you. They exaggerate difficulty. They magnify discomfort. They predict failure prematurely. But standards are objective. The task is the task. The hour is the hour. The repetition is the repetition. No emotional interpretation required. You have a choice. You can be dramatic, or you can be disciplined. Dramatic people burn out. Disciplined people build. Let's make this practical. You show up to train. You feel weak. Fine. Reduce weight slightly if necessary. But you still complete the session. You show up to work. You feel distracted. Fine. Remove distractions. Set a timer. Complete the block. You show up to study. You feel bored. Fine. Boredom is irrelevant. Continue. It's not about intensity. It's about completion. Completion builds identity. Every time you execute despite emotional resistance, you teach your brain something powerful. Feelings do not control behavior. That rewires you. You stop being reactive. You become directive. And that shift changes everything. Because when discipline becomes independent of emotion, consistency becomes predictable. No more emotional spikes followed by crashes. No more inspired sprints followed by lazy weeks. No more dependence on hype. Just steady execution. This is where most people fail. They chase motivation instead of building structure. Motivation feels good. Structure feels boring. But structure wins. Understand this clearly. Boredom is not a problem. Fatigue is not a problem. Mood swings are not a problem. Instability is the problem. And instability comes from emotional decision-making. Feelings are irrelevant to the task. Anchor yourself to that. The goal is not to eliminate emotion. The goal is to prevent emotion from interfering with standards. You can feel everything and still execute. That is power. You don't need their permission to operate like this. You don't need approval for being consistent. You don't need validation for being disciplined. You need standards. When others say, "I just wasn't feeling it," you will say nothing. You will have completed the task already. When others slow down because they're tired, you maintain the standard. When others fluctuate, you remain stable. That stability becomes your advantage. Because the world is emotional. The world is reactive. The world is inconsistent. If you remove emotion from execution, you immediately separate yourself. You become reliable, and reliability builds trust with others and with yourself. This chapter is about emotional detachment in performance. Not coldness, not suppression, detachment. The task is separate from the feeling. The standard is separate from the mood. The execution is separate from the story in your head. You do the work. Even when it's inconvenient, even when it's boring, even when you're tired, especially when you're tired, because discipline is what remains when motivation disappears. And motivation disappears most often when emotion takes control. You've removed emotion from execution. Good. Now we build something stronger than willpower. Chapter 3. Build systems that replace willpower. Willpower is finite. Systems are renewable. You must understand this at a biological level. Willpower drains. It weakens throughout the day. Every decision you make consumes mental energy. Every temptation you resist consumes cognitive fuel. By evening, most people are empty not because they lack ambition, but because they relied on raw restraint instead of structure. That's why you fail at night. That's why habits collapse under stress. That's why motivation disappears when life gets busy. It's not about character. It's about design. You have a choice. You can keep relying on willpower and burn out repeatedly. Or you can build systems that operate automatically. Structure eliminates struggle. Repeat it, because when structure is strong, struggle decreases. Most people try to be stronger. That's the wrong approach. Stronger willpower is unreliable. Stronger systems are permanent. Here's the shift. Stop asking, how can I resist? Start asking, how can I remove the decision? Decision-making is friction. Friction drains energy. If you decide what time to wake up every morning, you waste energy. If you decide whether to work out every day, you waste energy. If you decide when to start working, you waste energy. Make the decision once. Then automate. That's discipline. Design routines so decisions disappear. Wake up at the same time. Train at the same time. Work at the same time. Shut down at the same time. When timing becomes predictable, resistance weakens. It's not about intensity. It's about automation. Structure eliminates struggle. Look at your life honestly. Where are you depending on motivation instead of mechanics? You say you want to read more, but there's no scheduled reading block. You say you want to train consistently, but there's no fixed time. You say you want to build a business, but there's no structured work window. So you rely on energy, and energy is unreliable. If it's scheduled, it happens. If it depends on energy, it fails. That's the rule. Now let's go deeper. Environment dictates behavior. You think discipline is internal. It's not. It's environmental engineering. If junk food is visible, you eat it. If your phone is next to you, you check it. If your workspace is cluttered, you procrastinate. Your surroundings either support discipline or sabotage it. You have a choice. You can blame yourself, or you can redesign your environment. Remove friction from good habits. Lay out your workout clothes the night before. Keep your notebook open on your desk. Place books within reach. Block distracting websites. Silence notifications. Increase friction for bad habits. Delete the app. Move the junk food out of the house. Charge your phone outside the bedroom. Add inconvenience to temptation. Make distraction difficult. Make discipline easy. That's strategy. You don't need superhuman willpower. You need intelligent design. Professionals don't rely on emotion. They rely on systems. Think about it. Airlines operate on checklists. Factories operate on processes. Military units operate on protocols. Why? Because systems reduce error. You are no different. Your goals require systems. You say you want to write every day. Fine. Create a rule. 500 words before checking your phone. No exceptions. You say you want to train consistently. Fine. Fixed days. Fixed time. Non-negotiable. You say you want to improve your focus. Fine. 90-minute deep work block. Same time. Every weekday. No debate. No improvisation. Automation beats inspiration. Inspiration is unpredictable. Automation is reliable. When something becomes routine, resistance drops. The brain conserves energy when patterns repeat. That's neuroscience. Habits reduce cognitive load, which means the more structured your life becomes, the less mental strain you experience. Structure eliminates struggle. Say it again. The reason you feel overwhelmed is not because you have too much to do. It's because you're deciding too much. Decision fatigue creates chaos. Systems create clarity. And clarity builds discipline. Here's another truth. The more chaotic your schedule, the weaker your consistency. Random effort produces random results. Predictable effort produces predictable growth. If your wake-up time changes daily, your energy changes daily. If your work hours shift constantly, your output shifts constantly. Consistency in schedule builds consistency in performance. You have a choice. You can live reactively, or you can live architecturally. Architectural living means designing your days before they begin. Plan tomorrow tonight. Time block the essentials. Define your non-negotiables. Prepare your environment. Then execute. No emotional vote required. This is how discipline survives when motivation disappears. Because when motivation fades, the system remains. When you're tired, the alarm still rings. When you're bored, the calendar still speaks. When you're distracted, the routine still activates. Systems carry you when energy cannot. And over time, this compounds. Small structured days become strong structured weeks. Strong weeks become disciplined months. Disciplined months become transformed identities. People will say you are so consistent. They won't see the system behind it. They won't see the friction you removed. They won't see the automation you built. They won't see the decisions you eliminated. But you will know, because discipline is not heroic. It is mechanical, and mechanical beats emotional every time. Stop trying to feel stronger. Start designing smarter. Create structure. Reduce decisions. Engineer your environment. Structure eliminates struggle. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. So build systems that don't collapse when motivation does. You've removed emotion from execution. Good. Now your structure must withstand boredom. Chapter 4. Train consistency under boredom. Boredom is the real test. Not fear. Not difficulty. Not complexity. Boredom. Anyone can act when excited. Anyone can start when the goal is fresh and the vision is vivid. The beginning is easy because novelty carries you. But novelty fades. The second week feels ordinary. The third week feels repetitive. The fourth week feels slow. And that is where most people quit. Not because it's impossible, because it's boring. You have a choice. You can chase excitement, or you can train consistency. Excitement is unstable. Consistency is power. The truth is simple. Success is built in repetition that no longer feels impressive. The workouts that feel routine. The study sessions that feel dull. The business tasks that feel mechanical. That's where mastery lives. I perform even when it's boring. Repeat it, because boredom is not a sign to stop. It is a sign that you are entering the real work. Most people are addicted to stimulation. They need progress to feel dramatic. They need constant feedback. They need visible results. But visible results are delayed. The invisible days create visible outcomes. That's the key. You go to the gym for weeks without dramatic change. You write for months before momentum builds. You study for years before expertise becomes obvious. Nothing glamorous. Nothing viral. Nothing applauded. Just repetition. Mastery is built in monotony. The professional understands this. The amateur resists it. The amateur says, "This feels repetitive." The professional says, "Good. That means I'm refining." The amateur needs excitement. The professional needs execution. Which one are you? You have a choice. You can stop when stimulation drops, or you can continue when boredom rises. I perform even when it's boring. Say it again, because boredom is not pain. It is simply lack of novelty, and novelty is not required for progress. Discipline is repetition without applause. No one claps for your early mornings. No one celebrates your consistent effort. No one announces your invisible growth. That's why most people stop. They need external reinforcement. But you don't need their permission. You don't need their validation. You don't need applause. You need standards. The standard does not change because the task feels dull. Here is the psychological shift you must make. Stop interpreting boredom as a negative emotion. Boredom is neutral. It does not mean the task is wrong. It does not mean you are off track. It does not mean progress has stopped. It means repetition has begun. And repetition is where identity is built. If you only perform when inspired, you are unstable. If you perform when bored, you are disciplined. That's the difference. Look at elite athletes. They practice the same fundamentals thousands of times. Same swing, same drill, same movement. Not because it's exciting, but because refinement demands repetition. Look at musicians. They rehearse scales endlessly. Not glamorous, not stimulating, but necessary. Look at high-level professionals. They review processes again and again. Precision is born from monotony. You must become comfortable with uncelebrated effort, comfortable being unseen, comfortable being unrecognized, comfortable doing the work without immediate reward. That comfort separates you, because most people seek stimulation. Few seek mastery. Here is the practical instruction. When boredom hits, do not escape it. Stay. Do not switch tasks for stimulation. Complete the repetition. Do not reach for distraction. Focus deeper. Train your nervous system to tolerate repetition without reward. This builds psychological endurance. I perform even when it's boring. Use that phrase when your mind drifts, because your mind will drift. It will say, "This is repetitive." It will say, "This is slow." It will say, "This isn't exciting anymore." Ignore it. Feelings are irrelevant to the task. Remember that from the previous chapter. This is where systems prove their strength. Systems carry you through boredom. You don't need inspiration. You need structure. And structure thrives in repetition. Another truth. Boredom often precedes breakthrough. Right before skill sharpens. Right before progress compounds. Right before growth becomes visible. There is a long stretch of monotony. Most people quit in that stretch. That's why most people never reach mastery. They confuse lack of excitement with lack of progress. Don't make that mistake. Progress is often silent. It accumulates quietly. It strengthens slowly. It reveals itself suddenly. But only to those who stayed consistent when nothing felt dramatic. You have a choice. Leave when it gets dull, or stay when it gets repetitive. Staying builds strength, because repetition strengthens neural pathways. It automates skill. It deepens competence. When you train under boredom, you are no longer dependent on emotional highs. You become stable, and stability is rare. The world is overstimulated. Notifications, noise, entertainment, endless novelty. If you can focus through boredom, you gain an unfair advantage. Because while others seek dopamine, you seek development. While others chase excitement, you build endurance. While others restart constantly, you continue. That continuation compounds. Days become weeks. Weeks become months. Months become transformation. Not because it was exciting, but because it was consistent. Discipline is repetition without applause. Let that settle. You do the work even when no one is watching. You continue even when results are delayed. You refine even when improvement feels slow. That is power. Because when motivation disappears, boredom is what remains. And if you can perform in boredom, you will outperform everyone who depends on excitement. You've learned to remove emotion. You've built systems. Now you've trained under monotony. Good. But there is another trap that destroys discipline: attachment to results. Chapter 5. Separate identity from outcome. Results fluctuate. Identity must not. That is the distinction most people never make. You work hard one week and see progress. You feel powerful. You work hard the next week and see nothing. You feel discouraged. Why? Because you tied your identity to the outcome. When you win, you feel disciplined. When you lose, you feel weak. That is fragility. If your self-image rises and falls with results, you are unstable. And instability destroys consistency. You have a choice. You can anchor your identity to outcomes, or you can anchor your identity to action. Outcomes fluctuate. Identity must not. The market shifts. The scale fluctuates. The audience responds unpredictably. The opportunity disappears. But your standard? That must remain constant. If you only feel disciplined when winning, you are emotionally dependent on success. And success is not always immediate. That's the key. You are disciplined because you act, not because you succeed. I execute regardless of outcome. Repeat it, because execution is within your control. Results are not. You can control effort. You can control preparation. You can control consistency. You cannot control timing. You cannot control other people. You cannot control external variables. So why would you attach your identity to something unstable? It's not about winning. It's about adherence. Look at athletes. Even the best lose games. Look at entrepreneurs. Even the best experience failed launches. Look at creators. Even the best produce content that underperforms. But the disciplined ones do not collapse. They return to execution. The fragile ones disappear. The difference is identity. If you say, I am disciplined only when I succeed, then one setback destroys your confidence. If you say, I am disciplined because I execute, then no setback can remove your identity. You have a choice. Let results define you, or let standards define you. Standards are stable. Results are volatile. You must separate identity from outcome. This is how self-respect is built. Self-respect does not come from applause. It does not come from numbers. It does not come from public validation. It comes from keeping your word to yourself. Win or lose, you followed through. That builds something deeper than confidence. It builds trust. Trust in yourself. And trust is stronger than motivation. Imagine two people. One succeeds quickly and becomes arrogant. When failure hits, they collapse. The other executes consistently. Sometimes they win. Sometimes they lose. But they never stop showing up. Who becomes stronger long term? The second, because discipline is measured by consistency, not by streaks of success. I execute regardless of outcome. Use that phrase when disappointment hits, because disappointment will hit. You will work hard and see no immediate reward. You will prepare and still fall short. You will invest effort and receive silence. And in that moment you have a choice. Quit because the outcome didn't match expectation, or continue because the standard remains unchanged. Continuing is discipline. This is why many people start strong and fade. They were motivated by the promise of success, not anchored in the identity of execution. When success delayed, motivation disappeared. But when identity is built correctly, execution continues. You do not wake up asking, "Will this work?" You wake up asking, "Did I complete my standard?" That shift changes everything. Because when your identity is execution-based, every day becomes winnable. You can't control external victory, but you can control internal adherence. That makes you stable, and stability is rare. Here's the behavioral instruction. Track process, not outcome. If your goal is fitness, track workouts completed, not just weight lost. If your goal is writing, track pages written, not just audience growth. If your goal is business, track daily inputs, not just revenue. Inputs are controllable. Outputs are delayed. Focus on the controllable. Detach emotionally from the uncontrollable. That does not mean you don't care about results. It means you understand their timeline. Results are lagging indicators. Execution is a leading indicator. If you keep executing, results eventually follow. But if you stop executing because results haven't appeared, they never will. You have a choice. Tie your worth to outcomes, or tie your worth to standards. One creates anxiety. The other creates resilience. Resilience wins. Self-respect comes from adherence to standards, not perfection. Adherence. Some days you will perform at 100%. Some days at 60%. But if you met the standard you set for that day, you win internally. And internal wins compound. Because discipline is what remains when motivation disappears, and motivation often disappears when outcomes disappoint. If you expect constant visible success, you will burn out. If you expect daily execution, you will grow. Separate identity from outcome. You are not your latest result. You are your repeated behavior. That is who you are. Not the score. Not the applause. Not the setback. The repetition. I execute regardless of outcome. Burn that into your thinking. Because once identity becomes execution-based, inconsistency feels unnatural. You don't quit because quitting would contradict who you are. You don't slow down because slowing down would violate your standard. You continue because execution defines you. You have detached from the emotional roller coaster of results. Good. Now we eliminate something that quietly sabotages discipline from within: negotiation. Chapter 6. Eliminate negotiation with yourself. Internal negotiation destroys momentum. Not failure. Not lack of talent. Not lack of opportunity. Negotiation. The quiet conversation in your head that sounds reasonable. Maybe later. I'll start after this. Just 5 more minutes. Tomorrow will be better. That voice is not harmless. It is the beginning of decay. Momentum does not collapse all at once. It erodes through small negotiations. You skip one session. You delay one task. You postpone one commitment, and each delay weakens identity. You have a choice. You can debate with yourself daily, or you can decide once and eliminate discussion. The decision is already made. Repeat it, because discipline is not about daily motivation. It's about eliminating daily reconsideration. Every time you reconsider a commitment, you drain mental energy. Every time you ask, "Do I feel like it?" you reopen a decision that should already be closed. That is wasted energy. Mental energy is finite. Stop spending it on arguments with yourself. Make decisions once. Execute daily. If you decided to train 4 times a week, that decision is final. If you decided to wake at 6 a.m., that decision is final. If you decided to build something meaningful, that decision is final. The daily execution is not a fresh vote. It is enforcement of a prior decision. That's the key. High performers do not wake up and renegotiate standards. They enforce them. You say you want discipline, but you allow debate. You let your mind reopen contracts that were signed. That is weakness. You don't need new motivation. You need finality. The decision is already made. Use that phrase when hesitation appears, because hesitation will appear in subtle forms. You'll think, "I deserve a break." You'll think, "Today is different." You'll think, "Just this once." And that's how inconsistency grows. One exception becomes two. Two become routine. Routine becomes identity. Internal negotiation feels harmless because it sounds logical. But logic without standards becomes sabotage. You have a choice. Protect your commitments, or entertain your excuses. You cannot do both. Understand this clearly. The more you negotiate, the less you trust yourself, because you prove that your word is flexible. And when your word is flexible, your discipline collapses. Trust is built through consistency. If you say you will do something and you do it, trust strengthens. If you say you will do something and you debate it, trust weakens. It's not about perfection. It's about reliability. Imagine telling someone you'll meet them at 6 p.m. Then every day at 5:55 you call and ask, "Do I really have to come?" Eventually they stop believing you. You do the same to yourself. Stop it. Make the decision once. Then remove reconsideration. This is where systems protect you. If your alarm rings and you immediately stand up, there's no negotiation. If your workout clothes are already laid out, there's no negotiation. If your calendar has a fixed work block, there's no negotiation. Structure eliminates debate, and debate drains energy. Mental energy is wasted on reconsideration. Think about how much time you lose arguing internally. 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, half an hour of scrolling before starting, an hour lost to avoidance. That's not laziness. That's negotiation fatigue. Reduce self-debate. Increase automatic action. Here's the practical instruction. When it's time to act, move immediately. No countdown. No analysis. No emotional check-in. Immediate movement interrupts negotiation. If you hesitate, your mind gains power. If you move instantly, the debate never begins. The decision is already made. Anchor to that, because discipline is easier when you remove options. Options create temptation. If maybe exists, you will eventually choose it. Remove maybe. There is yes, or there is no. If you committed, the answer is yes. Every day, you have a choice. Be someone who negotiates with discomfort, or be someone who enforces standards. Enforcement builds strength. Negotiation builds weakness. And here's the deeper truth. Negotiation is often disguised fear. Fear of discomfort. Fear of failure. Fear of effort. Instead of facing it directly, you soften the commitment. You reduce the standard. You give yourself an escape route. Close the escape routes. When quitting is not an option, effort increases automatically. That's why burning bridges works. It removes retreat. When the decision is already made, your mind stops searching for alternatives. And when alternatives disappear, focus sharpens. The disciplined life is not dramatic. It is decisive. You don't wake up wondering who you will be today. You already decided. You don't wonder whether you'll act. You already committed. You don't debate whether it's convenient. You already set the standard. The decision is already made. Say it when resistance whispers. Say it when comfort tempts. Say it when laziness disguises itself as logic. Because discipline survives when negotiation dies. You have removed emotion. You have built systems. You have separated identity from outcomes. Now you've eliminated internal debate. Good. But discipline is not built in massive heroic acts. It is strengthened daily in small, controlled moments. Chapter 7. Strengthen the discipline muscle daily. Discipline compounds like interest. Not dramatically, not instantly, but relentlessly. Most people think discipline is built in one powerful decision. One breakthrough moment. One life-changing shift. That's fantasy. Discipline is built in small acts of control repeated daily. Small control builds strong control. Repeat it, because this is where real strength is developed, not in grand gestures but in quiet consistency. You have a choice. You can wait for a dramatic transformation, or you can build capacity one controlled action at a time. Think about physical strength. You don't walk into a gym and lift the heaviest weight immediately. You lift what you can manage. Then you increase gradually. Over time, capacity expands. Discipline works the same way. Every small act of control strengthens the muscle. Waking up when the alarm rings. Finishing the task you started. Keeping your word on minor commitments. These are not small psychologically. They are deposits. And deposits compound. Micro-commitments build macro-character. That's the key. Your character is not shaped in extreme moments. It is shaped in ordinary ones. When no one is watching. When the task is minor. When the consequence seems small. That is when discipline is trained. You say, "It's just 5 minutes." You say, "It's not a big deal." You say, "This one doesn't matter." It does matter. Because identity is built through repetition. If you break small commitments, you weaken your internal authority. If you honor small commitments, you strengthen it. You have a choice. Be loose with small standards, or be precise with them. Precision compounds. Small control builds strong control. Say it when you're tempted to ignore a small promise. Because small promises are the training ground. Wake up on time. Not because it's dramatic, but because it builds obedience. Finish what you start. Not because it's impressive, but because it builds reliability. Put things back where they belong. Respond when you said you would. Complete the extra repetition. Each small act reinforces identity. and identity compounds faster than motivation ever could. Discipline is not about intensity. It is about consistency. Consistency builds capacity. Capacity builds confidence. Confidence builds courage. And courage fuels larger action. But it begins small. Most people fail because they aim for extreme change without foundational control. They try to overhaul their entire life in 1 week. They burn out. Then they conclude they lack discipline. No, they lacked progression. Start smaller than your ego wants. If you struggle to work out for an hour, commit to 10 minutes, but do it daily. If you struggle to write 1,000 words, commit to 200, but do it daily. If you struggle with massive goals, reduce the scale but increase the frequency. Daily repetition matters more than dramatic effort. Small control builds strong control. Now let's address friction. Daily friction builds resilience. Comfort weakens discipline. Slight discomfort strengthens it. You don't need extreme suffering. You need controlled friction. Take a cold shower for 30 seconds. Walk when you want to sit. Choose water when you want soda. Start immediately when you want to delay. Tiny acts of voluntary discomfort. That's how resilience is built. When you voluntarily choose discomfort, you train your brain to stop fearing it. Discomfort becomes familiar. And when discomfort becomes familiar, you stop avoiding growth. You have a choice. Avoid discomfort daily, or approach it deliberately. Approach it, because discipline grows when you confront resistance intentionally. Here's what happens psychologically. Each time you override comfort, your brain updates its self-image. It says, I am someone who does hard things. That identity becomes automatic. And once identity shifts, behavior stabilizes. But if you avoid friction daily, your brain updates differently. It says, I am someone who seeks comfort. That identity compounds too. Everything compounds. Your habits, your standards, your avoidance, your control. Compounding works in both directions. Choose carefully. Strengthening discipline daily means paying attention to small decisions. Do you scroll immediately upon waking? Or do you sit upright and breathe first? Do you abandon tasks halfway? Or do you complete them before moving on? Do you tolerate minor laziness? Or do you correct it immediately? These are the moments that matter. Because large discipline is impossible without small discipline. You cannot expect massive consistency if you ignore minor standards. Small control builds strong control. Again and again. Because repetition reinforces belief. Here's the practical instruction. Choose 3 small daily standards. Non-negotiable. Simple. Achievable. Example, wake up at the same time. Complete 1 focused work block. Do 1 act of voluntary discomfort. Track them, not obsessively, consistently. Win the day through small victories. And when you miss one, correct it immediately the next day. No drama, no identity crisis, just adjustment. Because discipline is strengthened through correction, not perfection. You will not be flawless, but you will be consistent. That's the difference. Over time, small discipline expands into larger capacity. Waking up on time makes early training easier. Completing small tasks makes large projects manageable. Choosing minor discomfort makes major challenges less intimidating. Your threshold rises. And as your threshold rises, your tolerance for difficulty increases. This is how disciplined people appear calm under pressure. They trained daily under small friction. They built the muscle slowly. You are not building a moment. You are building a system. And systems are strengthened through repetition. When motivation disappears, and it will, your daily discipline remains. Because you've practiced it in small ways every day. You've trained the muscle. Good. Now we move to something even more powerful, the ability to operate without needing recognition. Chapter 8. Operate without applause. External validation weakens internal authority. Read that again. If you need praise to continue, you are not disciplined, you are dependent. Dependent on approval. Dependent on recognition. Dependent on reaction. And dependence is weakness. You post your progress and wait for likes. You announce your goals and wait for encouragement. You share your plans and wait for applause. Why? Because applause feels like progress. But applause is not execution. You have a choice. You can work for attention, or you can work for advancement. If you need praise, you lose power. Because the moment praise disappears, so does your motivation. That's the trap. External validation creates emotional instability. When feedback is positive, you feel strong. When feedback is silent or negative, you slow down. That is fragile discipline. Real discipline is self-contained. It does not require witnesses. It does not require celebration. It does not require announcement. It requires standards. Silence strengthens me. Repeat it, because silence builds internal authority. When you work in silence, you remove performance from the equation. You are no longer doing it to be seen. You are doing it because it must be done. That's the key. The strongest discipline is invisible. No announcement. No dramatic declaration. No social performance. Just execution. Look closely at your behavior. Do you talk about what you're going to do more than you actually do it? Do you feel productive after announcing a goal, even before starting? That's dopamine from attention, not from achievement. And dopamine without discipline creates illusion. You feel accomplished before you've earned it. That weakens hunger. You don't need their permission. You don't need their validation. You don't need their applause. You need consistency. Work in silence. Improve in silence. There is power in quiet growth. Because when you remove the need to be seen, focus sharpens. You stop curating. You stop performing. You stop comparing. You simply execute. You have a choice. Chase visibility or chase mastery. Visibility is loud. Mastery is quiet. And mastery wins long term. Consider this. When you announce every step, you invite opinions. Opinions create pressure. Pressure creates emotional fluctuation. But when you move silently, you eliminate noise. No commentary. No external expectations. No distraction. Just the task. Silence strengthens me. Say it when you feel the urge to broadcast. Because broadcasting often replaces building. This doesn't mean isolation. It means intention. You don't hide progress out of fear. You simply don't depend on attention to fuel effort. The work matters, not the audience. Here's the deeper truth. When you rely on praise, you surrender control. If someone criticizes you, you hesitate. If someone ignores you, you slow down. If someone doubts you, you question yourself. That is emotional outsourcing. Discipline requires internal sourcing. Your approval must come from adherence to standards. Not from comments. Not from applause. not from recognition. Self-respect comes from execution. The strongest discipline is invisible because it is habitual. No announcement before waking early. No applause after finishing the workout. No broadcast after completing the work block. Just done. That's power. Because when you stop seeking validation, your energy redirects toward improvement. Less talking, more doing, less posting, more practicing, less announcing, more refining. This accelerates growth. You have a choice. Be loud and inconsistent, or be quiet and relentless. Relentless wins. Think about the individuals you respect most. Often they are not the loudest. They are the most consistent. They deliver repeatedly. They show up reliably. They don't over-explain their process. They execute. Silence strengthens you because it builds self-trust. When you do something without telling anyone, you prove to yourself that you don't need external reinforcement. That builds independence. Independence builds confidence. Confidence builds calm. Calm builds precision. It compounds. Now understand this clearly. Applause is temporary. Today they cheer. Tomorrow they forget. If your discipline depends on attention, it will collapse when attention shifts. But if your discipline depends on standards, it remains stable. That's the goal. Operate without applause. Train without announcement. Study without broadcasting. Build without advertising prematurely. Let results speak later. You have a choice. Perform for the moment, or build for the future. Performance is loud. Building is silent. And silent building is unstoppable. Silence strengthens me. Use that phrase when ego wants recognition, because ego seeks validation. Discipline seeks progress. The world rewards noise short-term. It rewards consistency long-term. Choose long-term. When motivation disappears, applause won't save you. Only structure will. Only identity will. Only standards will. You have learned to act without emotion. You have built systems. You have separated identity from outcomes. You have eliminated negotiation. You have strengthened daily discipline. Now you operate quietly. Good. But discipline is tested most intensely when energy collapses. Chapter 9. Make fatigue your training ground. The real test begins when energy drops. Not when you feel strong. Not when you feel motivated. Not when everything is aligned. When you're tired. Anyone can operate at 100%. Anyone can be focused when they're rested, inspired, and emotionally charged. That's easy. Discipline shows at 40%. When you slept poorly, when work drained you, when stress piled up, when your body feels heavy, that's where identity is exposed. You have a choice. Lower the standard because energy is low, or maintain the standard despite fatigue. Low energy, same standard. Repeat it. Because fatigue is not an exception. It is part of life. If your discipline only works when you're energized, it's not discipline. It's convenience. Life will not schedule challenges around your rest cycle. There will be long days. There will be unexpected problems. There will be emotional strain. And in those moments, your habits take over. Fatigue reveals character. When you're tired, you don't rise to intention. You fall to training. If you've trained excuses, excuses surface. If you've trained execution, execution surfaces. That's the key. You don't get to choose who you are when exhausted. Your preparation chooses for you. That's why this chapter matters. You must train yourself to maintain standards under exhaustion. Not extreme performance. Not heroic output. Standards. There's a difference. If your standard is a 1-hour workout and you're exhausted, maybe you reduce intensity slightly, but you still show up. If your standard is a focused work block and you're tired, maybe you slow the pace, but you complete the block. Low energy does not mean zero action. Low energy, same standard. Say it when your body wants comfort, because comfort whispers loudly when you're fatigued. It says, "You deserve a break." It says, "Tomorrow will be better." It says, "Skip it just this once." And if you listen repeatedly, fatigue becomes your excuse. But fatigue is neutral. It does not command you, tests you. You have a choice. Treat fatigue as a signal to stop, or treat fatigue as a training ground. Training ground builds resilience. This does not mean self-destruction. It means measured persistence. There is wisdom in recovery, but there is weakness in habitual retreat. Know the difference. If you are physically injured, you adjust intelligently. But if you are simply tired, you continue within your standard. Because discipline grows strongest when energy is lowest. Think about this clearly. If you only execute when conditions are ideal, your progress will always be inconsistent. But if you execute even when drained, your progress becomes stable. Stability wins long-term. Fatigue reveals character because it strips away performance. When you're tired, you don't pretend. You default. Default behavior is your true discipline level. If your default is scrolling when tired, that's your training. If your default is showing up anyway, that's your training. What are you training daily? You have a choice. Build habits that activate under pressure, or allow comfort to activate automatically. Pressure exposes preparation. This is why elite performers train under stress. Athletes practice at the end of sessions when muscles burn. Military units drill under exhaustion. Why? Because performance under fatigue is the real world. You won't always be fresh. So stop expecting peak conditions. Start building resilient standards. Low energy, same standard. Use it at the end of long days. Because the evening is where most discipline collapses. You start strong in the morning. By night, standards weaken. That's predictable. Which means you must be intentional. Create simple rules for low energy states. For example, if you're too tired for a full workout, you complete a minimum routine. No 0 days. If you're too drained for deep work, you complete at least one focused task. If you're too exhausted for complex improvement, you review fundamentals. Never 0. 0 builds weakness. Minimal builds momentum. Momentum preserves identity. You don't need peak output daily. You need consistent adherence. That's the difference. And here's something most people misunderstand. When you act under fatigue, confidence increases faster. Because you prove to yourself that energy is not your master. You prove that tired is a condition, not a command. That proof builds psychological toughness. Not loud toughness. Quiet toughness. The kind that doesn't complain. The kind that doesn't dramatize exhaustion. The kind that simply executes. Silently. You don't need their sympathy. You don't need acknowledgement for being tired. Everyone is tired. What separates disciplined individuals is what they do anyway. You have a choice. Join the culture of excuses. or build the habit of persistence. Persistence compounds. Imagine stacking small efforts on days when you didn't feel like it. Those are the days that change identity. Anyone can win when strong. Few continue when depleted. Be one of the few, because when motivation disappears, fatigue often replaces it. And if you can operate at 40%, you will outperform those who only function at 100%. That's the advantage. Discipline is not tested in comfort. It is revealed in exhaustion. So train there. Train when your legs feel heavy. Train when your focus feels dull. Train when your enthusiasm is gone. Not recklessly, intentionally. Maintain the standard. Low energy, same standard. Let that phrase override comfort, because fatigue will visit you often. And each visit is an opportunity to weaken, or an opportunity to reinforce identity. Choose reinforcement. You have now removed emotion, built systems, endured boredom, detached from results, eliminated negotiation, strengthened daily control, operated without applause, and trained under fatigue. There is one final step. Discipline must stop being something you do. It must become who you are. Chapter 10. Make discipline your identity. Motivation is temporary. Identity is permanent. That is the final shift. Up to this point, you have been practicing discipline, building systems, removing emotion, eliminating negotiation, training under boredom and fatigue. Now it becomes something deeper. You are no longer trying to be disciplined. You are disciplined. There is a difference. When you are trying, you leave room for failure. You leave space for excuses. You leave the door open for retreat. When you are, there is no debate. You don't try to brush your teeth. You do it. You don't try to breathe. You breathe. You don't try to protect your reputation. You protect it. Because those behaviors are tied to identity. Discipline must move into that category. You have a choice. Continue seeing discipline as something you attempt, or declare it as something you are. Identity is the anchor. If you see yourself as inconsistent, you will act inconsistently. If you see yourself as emotional, you will act emotionally. If you see yourself as disciplined, you will protect that identity. I am disciplined. I execute. I finish. Repeat it. Because repetition rewires identity. Every controlled action reinforces self-image. Every time you wake up when the alarm rings, your brain records evidence. Every time you complete the task despite resistance, your brain records evidence. Every time you refuse negotiation, your brain records evidence. Identity is built on accumulated proof. Not wishes. Not affirmations. Proof. If you act disciplined long enough, your mind stops questioning it. It becomes automatic. That's the key. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your identity. If your identity is weak, your standards collapse under pressure. If your identity is strong, inconsistency feels uncomfortable. When discipline becomes identity, laziness feels foreign. Excuses feel unnatural. Procrastination feels misaligned. Because it contradicts who you believe you are. You have a choice. Protect comfort. Or protect identity. Protect identity. Because once identity solidifies, behavior stabilizes. This is why temporary motivation always fades. Motivation operates on emotion. Identity operates on self-concept. Emotion fluctuates. Self-concept persists. When you say, I am disciplined, you are making a claim, and every action either strengthens or weakens that claim. If you skip standards repeatedly, identity erodes. If you maintain standards consistently, identity solidifies. This is not about perfection. It is about direction. You will have imperfect days. You will make mistakes. But disciplined identity responds differently, corrects quickly. It does not spiral. It does not dramatize failure. It does not abandon the system. It recalibrates, because disciplined people do not quit. They adjust. I am disciplined. I execute. I finish. Say it when doubt appears, because doubt will attempt to resurrect your old identity. It will say, this isn't who you are. It will say, you've always struggled. It will say, you're not built for this. But repetition silences doubt. When your actions consistently align with discipline, doubt loses credibility. The evidence becomes overwhelming, and identity hardens. When discipline becomes identity, you no longer rely on emotion. You rely on who you are. You don't ask, do I feel like it? You ask, what does someone like me do? That question changes behavior instantly. What does a disciplined person do when tired? They maintain the standard. What does a disciplined person do when bored? They continue. What does a disciplined person do when unnoticed? They execute silently. What does a disciplined person do when they fail? They return to structure. That's identity-driven action. You are no longer reacting to life. You are governing yourself. And once self-governance becomes your identity, external chaos loses control over you. Circumstances fluctuate. Energy fluctuates. Results fluctuate. You remain stable, because identity stabilizes behavior. Here's the practical instruction. Stop introducing yourself internally as someone who struggles with discipline. Stop telling yourself you are inconsistent. Stop reinforcing weakness with language. Your words matter. If you repeatedly say, I'm bad at consistency, your brain accepts it. Instead say, I am disciplined. I execute. I finish. Then act accordingly. Identity without action is delusion. Action without identity is unstable. Combine both. Declare it. Then prove it daily. Proof strengthens belief. Belief strengthens behavior. Behavior strengthens identity. It becomes a loop. And that loop becomes your foundation. You have a choice. Live emotionally, or live structurally. Live inconsistently, or live identity-driven. Because when discipline becomes identity, you no longer need motivation. You no longer need hype. You no longer need perfect conditions. You move because that's who you are. You finish because that's who you are. You maintain standards because that's who you are. I am disciplined. I execute. I finish. This is the final evolution. Discipline is no longer something you practice occasionally. It is the lens through which you operate. And once that shift happens, motivation can disappear completely. It doesn't matter, because you remain. Motivation will leave you. Energy will fade. Emotions will fluctuate. There will be mornings when you feel nothing, even doubt, even resistance. And that is the moment this book was built for. Because discipline is not loud. It is not dramatic. It does not depend on excitement. It is quiet. It is structured. It is relentless. It shows up when inspiration disappears. It executes when emotion fades. It finishes when others stop. You do not need to feel powerful. You need to be precise. You need to be consistent. You need to move when you do not want to move. From this moment forward, stop asking how you feel. Start asking what the standard requires. Build the system. Follow the structure. Eliminate negotiation. And prove not to the world but to yourself that when motivation disappears, you remain. Now act.